My name is MP Carver. I'm here with Diane Mehta, whose wonderful book, Tiny Extravaganzas, has just come out from Arrowsmith Press. And Diane has been kind enough to spend a little time with us answering some questions about this project. And to start us off, Diane, would you be kind enough tell me a little bit more about how this book came into being?
It's funny because I write very slowly ordinarily, but this book was written over maybe 3 years, maybe a little longer, but there was at least half the book that was written in a period of maybe 8 or 9 months. No, maybe closer to a year after while and after I was in Italy. So I'd gone to an artist residency in Italy, right? Right? Who can help it? I went to an artist residency in Italy right after COVID, sort of at the late middle part of COVID. And it was the first time out of the country. And it was in Umbria, and it was a castle. It was really spectacular. And it was just a different world, a complete moving away from everything I knew. And I and everybody else there just found ourselves working immediately and stuff just sort of flowing out. And I kept that up for many months afterwards. It was a 6-week residency. And walking, you feel Italy. I'm thinking about art. I'm thinking about other writers. And I met a lot of musicians, and that influenced me. And then it just kept going.
Ah, great, wonderful. And actually, so you mentioned flow, and reading the book, that is definitely one of the most striking qualities is the musicality of your work. Would you say a little bit more about that and about your composing process?
Thank you for that. That is really the highest compliment. I think what I found with this book, and which is something I'd always done, and which maybe I lost a little bit, was that I was catching the sound of music and rhythms that other people were creating, and of new songs I was being introduced to, new music, extended melodies, different way of thinking about sound. And so because it was this immersive education in every detail of tone and volume and interpretation, I got really immersed in these ideas of other people's. And then I started following their rhythms and the rhythms of the music that they were introducing me to. And I think I just sort of fell into the rhythms and copied the rhythms. So, you know how, when you're young, sometimes you listen to a song over and over and over, which is maybe how I used to write in my 20s. I remember one poem I wrote to this really sad song by Portishead. I must have played that song like 300 times. And it's sort of that same idea. You pick up a rhythm and it's completely new. So it really released me. And I think, thank you for saying that it's musical. So I tried very much to make it musical. And in fact, I use a musical lexicon often, but I'm not really writing about music. I'm just sort of paralleling it.
Right, right. Well, and actually, and I'm so interested in that. So I will admit I am not a musical person at all. I wouldn't describe myself that way. How did you, and was it just a matter of listening and re-listening until you kind of had those rhythms in your body, or did you have a more conscious editing process or repetition pattern?
I definitely edit actually obsessively. Like I'll go through dozens and dozens and dozens, 100 drafts of something over an intense time period of 3 to 6 weeks. I mean, or a full week. But in Italy, I was writing 2 poems a week, and then I was editing later. But I was editing like sort of ferociously while I was going as well. I'm trying to remember your exact question. I think I caught the music and the sort of uplifted feelings or surprising feelings, or something that completely surprised me by foreshortening or extending or repeating. And I was in that moment, that musical moment, in a very visceral way. And that's when I was really flowing and getting stuff out. And then I would edit around that.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. And actually, you keep you're connecting to a lot of the questions I had to ask you. So
Good.
you also mentioned the word surprising, and speaking of lexicon and your language in general, I felt it was constantly full of surprise. Like I wasn't sure what word would come next based on the word that came before it, and so there was just it gave it a very a kind of a light and playful feeling, even though even though there was so much craft underneath, and you could tell that. I wonder, so it's interesting to hear then that they went through so many revisions, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was about that. In how much would you say of the original poem, on average, like ends up in the final version?
Maybe 30%, I'm guessing, because it's really just scribbles in the beginning. But I want to say thank you for that comment, because Aerosmith is so wonderful. And Osgold, I met when I was studying at Boston University years ago, and there was something I learned from Derek Walcott at the time, which was to wait and be patient and try to find the word that is inevitable. So the fact that you said there are surprises and that you don't know what word is coming next is exactly what I've been trying to do for decades, which is figure out the exact right word rhythmically and in terms of meaning. And this is a rare thing when it works, but I keep trying to pursue that. I keep chasing it. And then what I've been learning as I got older and I got better at craft, and what I then learned from musicians, which really pushed me ahead, was to kind of foreshorten things or to extend it so much it was durationally kind of unendurable. So the surprises then became more choppy and asymmetrical, more like jazz. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for the poems. And actually, would you be kind enough to maybe pick a few to read for us?
Hey, they all somehow, relate to music or art, but I'm going to start with a short poem, which actually took me many weeks, and most of the poem is intact. And in terms of like 30%, this is more like 80%, except there was maybe 3 or 4 lines, and then it got down to 2 lines that were grueling and took me most of the 2 weeks. So this sort of fell out while I'd been producing, and then I just couldn't write. And so I wrote a poem about not being able to write, and it's called Extended Melodies, which is something I learned about melody from an Icelandic musician that was in Italy that I asked a million dumb questions to. And I said, I don't understand this music. I don't understand your music. And why is there so much silence? And why do you decide to remove the melody? And he said, well, no, I didn't. This is actually a very traditional piece of work. I did not remove the melody at all. I just extended it so much that you can't hear it unless you're really listening. So that sort of blew my mind. And so that was the name of the poem. And then this is a poem about not being able to write. And I might sing a little bit. I don't have a particularly good voice, so forgive me. Extended Melodies. I worked all day, but nothing took. Not even thought would take a look. Not still the nothing that was me mattered much. Tuneless and multiple free. I kept it up and orchestrated some ensembles. Cello, bird song, violin, auto-tuned it, added cymbals, and got the curve and scar of personality wrong. My pitch too wide harmonically. Clatterings and shatterings, soundings, universal, escape my ears. Pursuing joy, enjoying trouble. Well, how'd I do?
Beautiful, beautiful.
Good. Yeah, I can't read it any other way now. This is the only way I can read it, with this sort of singing, because half singing because I'm collaborating with a musician. I've been working through this song, so it's impossible to actually read it properly.
It makes
improperly.
It makes me think that there needs to be an audiobook version for sure. I'm always surprised that more books have turned into audiobooks than are, although it seems to be increasing, but
It's a lovely idea.
Mm.
Do you want me to read more now or later?
Yes, please. Yeah, read that.
Okay.
More for us, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Okay, this one I'm going to read, which is, it's about Willem de Kooning's Woman 1, which is this giant painting at MoMA. And he spent several years painting this weird looking, heavy set, broad busted, aggressive looking, fierce woman, and then carving her up and then doing it again. And I really love her. And he did something unusual, and I think he brought her into being. So I think my book really is about conversations with art, other artists, with myself, with memory, time. And this is a conversation that he had with his art over time, which I decided I would have a conversation with him and then the woman in his painting over time. So this is what I'm pursuing. William de Kooning's Woman 1. Again that day, when I drop everything and train it midtown to see her, my still life mind, eager for her distorted gloss of figuration, unfiguring herself, figuring out something else beyond fieldscapes made of lines de Kooning puzzled out so long before he jigsawed them along the contours of a woman he refined, then scraped apart to reconstruct her once again. He'd volume up and messify the flatness of the modern, quick slashing strokes. So much encrusted paint, her figure turned glyptic as he turned the art of painting intaglio. All the matrices and semi-precious colors defining her figure defined so little that she recedes into the canvas as if engraved and remains below the lines and curves of what we think a woman is. Some passersby ooh, and then on closer look appear repulsed at this terrorizing doll of clashing lines and no perspective. But I see all the perspectives, all at once. If you construct a woman who refuses to cohere in an abstract field, there's no end to what you'll find between her ribs, inside her claw-toothed mouth, behind her many-angled eyes forever open with surprise. It was never intaglio he wanted, only a process that signified process, not progress. The daily work of working out who you care about most. I think he shaped a woman who was his in abstracted days ahead, for she inched her chair toward him as he approached her with his brushes, and she filled the frame. It seems unlikely either cared about sunlight, for he could complicate all the colors and watch her illuminate within. Art can talk about love all it wants, but here is how to love. A rag-boned female abiding his work and still becoming. For even a paintbrush knows a woman has moving parts. Glitter, breastplates, blue-green curves, and the uncoiling self, savage and feverish. He designed her not to please, but doesn't she? Clearly, she believes in beauty. She is the resemblance of. Okay, I'm going to do a third poem. And so this is very much about Italy and the one musician who I became very close to. And she's a cellist and really a remarkable woman. And she was chasing a sound. And so this poem is really about chasing a conversation with her as she is chasing a sound. And we're out picking grapes. It's really lovely there. Landscape with double bow. Rondeau is what you really want. Solo and refrain. We and each the musical improvisation of the operatic day. Sonic scavenging and comedic chigging. Inside some beckon, of one another. Oh, wouldn't it be grand to be a whole note dragged across the bridge of your singular, sound-expanding double bow, to be orchestral, to be drunk, to drink the velvet sun from the arbor trellis. Fruit of purple grapes we plucked, bunches of dolce to color our throats, and that improvised, word-spun truth. I, terrified, say I can't derive on cue death, light, blueprints that fit the choral codes of what music thinks writing is about. We twisted grape notes so easily off their stems, screw of death in cupped hands. We follow seductions of light. You move above and underneath the strings in C strokes. One bow was not enough to match the warmth 2 bows create. So you invented ways to get more harmony. Upper bow and under bow, independent but close, staccato and legato, legato and staccato, to choose a way to hear the world and harvest sound in it. Curve of bow, curve of earth. Curves your eyes interpret as ultraviolet. Still you want more color, more sound to harvest, more distortion. Pale blue resonators you sculpted in local clay, land in sky blue above the land distort the sound you widened already. You are looking for a vibration lower than what the lowest string is tuned to, pitched so low your ear can't find it. Imagination, lore, solo of magma, baritone of fantasia. I cannot rogue my syllables and improvise around temptation ears like yours, but love the glut, the secret, the grand distortion of your polyphonic heart, which believes in ghost tones. What is true? Grapes chandelier from the arbor and ripen on the tongue. We jammed the grapes inside a bowl, so plentiful, and ate their tiny hearts at lunch.
Beautiful, thank you. What a killer final line in that.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, great. All right, and I want to get back to asking about more about ekphrastic since it's so important in this. But first, I have to ask you a question about form in your work, because these ones, at least as far as I could tell, don't seem to be in a prescribed form, but form seems very important. They're very regular in a certain way. How do you approach form in your work?
You know, I spent years studying form and trying to perfect it. So I became very good at metrical writing and rhyming and using form. And I used to write endlessly in tercets, and I don't want to write in tercets anymore. I wrote hundreds of sonnets. I was very obsessed with form, and I was obsessed with getting it right. And then I learned that getting it right meant moving away from it and starting to cut up the form and starting to add spaces, add sounds, add pauses, abbreviate things and push harder and push across a line, and then figure out how to merge lines and sentences together. So part of what you're seeing formally is the way I try to work out the line and sentence together. So I might have a line that's 1, 2, 3, 4.5 lines long, and there are a couple sentences that cross over it, and maybe then there is a short line and then two lines. So I'm very attentive to those kinds of things. So you'll never see or seldom see in one of my poems 2 lines in a sentence and 2 lines in a sentence and end stopped exactly where it is. I try to push hard across the end of a line and jam, then slow, then abbreviate in the beginning of the line, which is something Seamus Heaney does a lot. And certain poets who are really good at form play with the pauses and try to surprise you instead of letting you read just to the end of the line. So the form is always there. And I kind of just think in pentameter, I think iambically, and then I try to remove words. And while I'm changing what I'm writing or the meaning, I'm always paying attention to the rhythm of it, which is essentially the rhythm of American speech, iambic pentameter, while trying to also move away from it. So that's where you're seeing the form.
Great. Oh, great. And I have to ask you, so the tercet does appear here.
Oh, no.
What do you think about, how do you think about the tercet? I only ask because I've been writing a lot in tercets lately. So
which poem are you referring to? I don't think.
well, so for example, actually, one of my favorite poems, If You Could See the World from Here, is in tercets. Or actually, no, it only starts in tercets.
Actually, if you give me a page number,
Sure,
that's
sure.
easier because my eyesight at this close.
Let's see. Oh, 45. Oh, no, wait, no, that's in quatrain. I swear.
You're like, no, there's no tercets in here. There might be
Well, there are
poems that
definitely
are not
tercets, but there may
matching
not be a poem that-
stanzas.
Yeah, there may not be a poem that is straight tercets, right? I may have just been
Maybe-
paying attention.
Maybe
since
it's a poem about Athena. I have a poem about trying to go meet Athena, this statue in Rome, and I'm walking across town to go meet her. And I pretend we've been having a conversation for years, which we have, but on the phone. So I
Right.
bet there's a tercet in there.
I-
And
this is
actually,
what
you
I
know,
get
someone else had
from-
told me that I'm writing in six line stanzas right now. And he's like, that's essentially tercets. It's just two tercets shoved together.
Right. Oh, you know what? No, another one I really liked, Sound Crossing the Tobacco Fields, is in tercets on 102.
You're right. It is.
Okay, good. This is what I get for going off my question list. I throw myself.
It's way more fun this way. I love that you found that. And yeah, it's so funny. Wow. So what was the question about tercets?
Oh. Well, what do you think about that? Why did you want to move away from the tercet? Just to do something else, or?
I got so used to writing in tercets. Sometimes you get so good at something that you either get tired of it or it gets tired of you, and so you can no longer really excel at it. And maybe I think I in some ways I was repeating my own rhythms. I got used to. I see poets doing this. There are plenty of poets that I knew when I was younger that are still writing in tercets or still writing sort of the same poem. And so in order to try to get away from that, I forced myself to switch to something else. At some point I started writing sonnets, and then I forced myself to switch out of sonnets because I kind of just broke myself writing sonnets. I became very, very good at them and really focused on a kind of Hopkins-esque fierce line, and to make it really exciting. But then it no longer became exciting because everything started sounding alike. So I think that's why I moved away from it. Not that I have anything against tercets, because I am writing in 6-line stanzas. It's just because I couldn't move forward. And part of what I've always wanted to do is evolve. And I do learn slowly. And I've evolved slowly over time, but part of that evolution is switching forms and moving into one stanza versus another. Like for decades, I could not write in longer stanzas. And now really all I want to do is write in 6-line stanzas. And I never imagined I couldn't even get to a quatrain. It was too square for me.
Right.
So I wrote long, unstructured poems, other kinds of things, but really now 5 lines, 6 lines, sometimes 7.
Thank you. Yeah, and to come back to that, to the idea of ekphrastic poetry and responding to other forms of art in poetry, is that something that you think you were inspired to do by the place and time that a lot of these poems came from, or is that something you've always been drawn to?
I definitely wasn't always drawn to that. You know, I like many people was drawn to myself, was drawn to talking about myself, and maybe I just got tired of that. Maybe I got tired of listening to everybody else also talking about themselves. And I thought, why am I always talking about myself? What am I going to learn this way? So as a writer in general, and I write in many different genres, and I'm a journalist, increasingly I wanted to learn, and I realized how much I had to learn. And so learning from other writers, other artists, other musicians, it's an entirely new world. It's an entirely new kind of way of new way of thinking. And most people don't sort of cross over very easily, or they're nervous. And I'm not nervous because I don't mind making mistakes. I don't mind failing, because I learned so much. And I won't give up. I don't ever give up. So if there's a poem that's not working and I'm certain that there's something there, I'll keep at it for like 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day for 6 weeks. I don't stop, and I don't switch to something else. And usually something clicks, but I've learned to tolerate that grueling misery of trying to be patient. And so I think your question was about other people and why did I learn sort of why the ekphrastic poem. I started also looking at objects. And part of this maybe has to do with my son, because he became a potter he was already a potter. He had spent his whole life making pottery, and then he started throwing during COVID, and it really sort of changed his life. And as he became more attentive to objects, so did I. So I would always look at paintings or other kinds of things, but suddenly I became aware of ceramics and how they looked, and the detail, the meticulousness of it, especially moon jars. So I have a poem about responding to a potpourri vase at the Frick, and then the object ties to my child, and there's a bunch of poems in here about my son, but they're really not that many because he's left. He's left me. He went to college. Unbelievable. So he went to college. The objects, the ceramics, my backyard, everything around me in the house, especially as everything became more intensified during COVID, you just around the things that you see, and the park and Prospect Park in Brooklyn. I became more aware of those kinds of things and what they meant in terms of my life and time moving on and him moving on. And so a lot of things then attached to my son and to a sense of time, since none of us knew whether we'd make it through COVID or what would happen to the world as we think now too. So somehow time and duration and objects and getting older came together, and I looked towards other things, objects, paintings, music, to figure it out.
Oh, great. And actually, and you mentioned too some of the that you do other kinds of writing, and for people who aren't familiar with your bio, you're working on a novel, you write essays, you've written for major newspapers, magazines.
Yeah.
Do you find that when you're interested in certain themes that you tend to explore those across your writing, or are there certain things that you think are best saved or tackled for poetry, via poetry?
Wow, that's a hard question. I don't think poetry has cornered the market on anything, although I do think there's a heightened sense of drama that's natural, but I'm more interested in the drama of language rather than the drama of whatever is going on. And I mean, one thing that bothers me incessantly and increasingly as I get older is poverty and this inequality between people. And this is all over the world. I mean, it started off feeling, you're just always sensing it around you. And, and I really like the poet Audre Lorde, because she has this bridge between what the traditional old white men from England were doing and what American women were doing. And so she used their form to try to write about poverty in a sonnet or in traditional forms. So that maybe sort of embodies my feeling about the ways that I can sort of cross genres. That I started writing for the Times for a little while. I've written a ton of pieces for them, but a couple pieces that really affected me was writing about parenting rights. And then there was a lot of crossover between parenting rights if you were gay or lesbian versus discrimination rights, and it depended on localities and states. And so there are all these crossovers between that, or single women, or someone who had sex once in a bar and actually deserved the right to have her child supported by that person until they're 21 in New York State or 18 in Texas. So all those kinds of things made me angrier. I mean, I've always, I think, you can get passionate and angry, but they started making more of a difference in terms of trying to figure out what matters to me now. So somehow that's, I mean, it's not like I'm writing directly about poverty, but in that way, a sense of what the suffering that other people have connects to the suffering that has always been there in poetry. Poetry is a place for suffering and maybe some emergence. But the writing in other genres, and I have this in my novel about India, which deals with partition to partition. So there's a lot of slaughter, a lot of suffering, and a lot of responsibility is trying to understand who's responsible for what and how you handle your flaws, what your flaws are, and this is easy to explore in essays too. So I have an essay collection coming out in a year, and so those kinds of things probably show up even more so in the essays, because I was very aware of racism growing up when we emigrated here from America, and it was hard to bear. There weren't a lot of Asians, South Asians, Asians at all in the 70s. So that became something that was very intense for me. And I write about that much more in my first book. But now I'm older, and this poem feels very much about middle age. Such a horrible term, but that's what it is.
Well, just say to one of the poems that struck me that I think in the book that I think touched on that just slightly, maybe not deeply into suffering, but the Hedgeman, I thought was a wonderful.
Oh, so interesting that you said that. I'm just going to look at it. Thank you for liking that.
86. Actually, would you mind reading it? We can sneak one more poem in here.
Hedgeman. The gardener climbs a ladder, wiring floodlights in to snip the darkness off and save us. We think we are so rich, below hedges trimmed. We believe in Galileo because we telescope objects of desire and confirm their centrality. We have lived here since the 14th century. We are kings of pencil shavings and paper, gaming high designs. We word build and Scrabble and weep over apocalypse letters that won't weave Mechaniv into E or Zach in O. The floodlights swallow all the stars we loved so much. But made within its shimmer spotlights of our faces, dissolving behind us with words and shapes we made at our tables. Knowledge in hand, believing we are so rich.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know that's kind of playing multiple ways with the idea of rich, but it was such a striking poem.
Thank you for noticing that one, because I'm not sure people notice that one in particular. There's so many other poems about grief or that are sort of swingy and that are easier to appreciate. But I think that this Mechaniv, I have words, as you see, that don't exist, Mechaniv and Zach. And they're designed not to really make sense. I mean, what kind of peculiar world do we live in? You have a hedgeman, a gardener climbing a ladder. What is the hedge? This hedgeman is sort of a fantasy. And we constantly, this is also a poem that takes place in Italy. Well, there was actually a gardener trimming the hedges, and we all think we are so rich with our words, with our language, with our stuff, and what we create is so important. And then we also think, of course, literally, we are so rich compared to so many people in the world, and that's not true necessarily.
Yeah, and I think a poem like this really strikes me. I'm somebody who grew up, poor, so to speak, and my mother, for example, wouldn't know what a word like centrality means.
Yeah.
So those questions are always so interesting to me when I come across them in poetry, and I think they're so worth exploring. And not all poetry looks at them in a nuanced way. So it's wonderful when you find.
Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up right around here and right in Brooklyn. So, no, thank you. Yeah, that was one. I've got a few written down here, but that was one of the ones that struck me. Um,
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm happy you like that one.
all right. And actually, let me ask you next. I think we're just about coming to the end of our interview. So one thing I want to make sure that I ask you, uh, for any young poets, especially, or beginning poets, who are watching right now, what advice would you give to somebody just starting out on this path?
Someone in my graduate school, in my class at grad school, asked a question to Robert Haas, the poet, and he said, "What books would you recommend?" And we all sort of went, "Oh," and like, which books out of all the books in the world would you recommend? And I remember Robert Haas looked sort of mortified, and then, I thought about this question. I thought about that moment so much over the years. I think what I would recommend actually is a thesaurus. And maybe for starters, a rhyming dictionary. It's fun, not that you get a rhyme from a rhyming dictionary, but it opens up your ideas and then brings you to another word. And then you lose yourself in the next word and you think, oh, what about a 3-syllable word? And then you go back to your paper and you think, it makes you think of the words in a new way. And it makes you, instead of feeling stuck, like if you're looking for a rhyme, like right and white, you might find something else because you're looking for something and someone else is pushing you somewhere else. Just like you pick up another book, like I don't know. I looked at this the other day and I thought, oh, I found a word. It's Lucretius on the nature of things. So I stole a word. I'm allowed to steal one word, I figure. So, and this is also a good lesson. You can steal one word, but not many more. I mean, not anymore, because I notice if someone steals 2 words by, say, Elizabeth Bishop or Seamus Heaney, or I notice if someone steals a rhythm, I might steal a rhythm, which I think is fun to do, but not for very long, not more for a couple of, duration of a few seconds. So I think those are sort of very practical tips, but I have 2 more tips. One is, instead of writing about love, and I write about love all the time, I shove the word love in everywhere. Okay, so just don't listen to me. But instead of using the word love all the time or writing about your girlfriend, someone told me once, write about a hike. Write about something else, because all the stuff that you have in you will come out in your diction if you're careful with it, instead of saying exactly what you want to say. So try not to say it. And then, of course, go ahead and say it, but try to not say the most obvious thing. And then also, there's some utility in just writing garbage. You just keep writing and writing and writing. And then you look at it and think, wow, that's terrible. And then you start working on it. And it is terrible. Like it is supposed to be terrible. It's not supposed to just come out all fine. The other thing is, I think that it would be nice to see more poets try to be sort of honest to themselves and what they want to write about, rather than writing in ways that are trendy or that are designed to get published or that sound like everyone else. So I feel that if someone is doing, and this is advice someone gave me once too, which probably made it a little harder for me. It took me longer to get published, took me longer to get attention. I didn't get the same kind of attention, got different kinds of attention. Now I feel good about it. But I figured out who I was, and then realized who my people were and who would care about my work. So I think people have to figure out exactly what kind of poet they are. Do you have a more traditional influences? Do you like music? Do you like a lyrical poem? Do you want to write content? Do you want to write poems that are more about a stance? I don't want to say political, because all poems are inherently political. So it has to do with choices and the decisions you make and the kind of education that you've gotten. Inherently, everything is political. So it would be nice to see things that you don't see all the time, that are surprising, or that try to do something a little mixed up, but that don't necessarily make sense. That's what I tried to do in that Hedgeman poem. So I'm glad you noticed. I had to force myself not to make sense and to let it just sit there, because that's part of what the confusion is about what you think your value is. So those, I think those are hopefully useful for people.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Diane Mehta, so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. And just a reminder to everybody watching, the Tiny Extravaganzas is available right now. You can find out more on the Arrowsmith website. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.